Sir, can I just smell the food? The boy's voice was so quiet that Ethan Walker almost thought he had imagined it. Almost. The words hung in the cold afternoon air of the Denver transit station, fragile as a snowflake drifting through sunlight. 8 hours later, federal agents would step out of black SUVs and bring the entire terminal to a standstill. But at that moment, none of that mattered. At that moment, all Ethan saw was a child trying not to ask for help. The station buzzed with the usual rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon. Bus engines rumbled outside. Electronic signs flickered overhead. Travelers rolled suitcases across polished floors while announcements echoed from distant speakers. The smell of coffee, pretzels, and fresh bread drifted from the food court. Yet somehow, amid all that movement, one boy sat perfectly still. Ethan noticed him because stillness always stood out in a busy world. The boy occupied a corner seat near gate 14, hands folded neatly in his lap. He looked about 11 years old. His blonde hair was slightly messy, as though the wind had spent the day arguing with it. His navy jacket appeared expensive, but it was smudged with dirt along one sleeve. His sneakers looked new, though one lace had snapped and dangled loose against the floor. Everything about him seemed out of place. Not poor, not homeless, just misplaced. Ethan adjusted the strap of his worn backpack and checked the time on his phone. His shift driving the city bus route had ended 30 minutes earlier. Normally, he would already be heading home to his daughter, but the weather forecast predicted snow by evening, and he wanted to pick up groceries before the roads became difficult. He should have kept walking. Most people did. Yet something about the boy kept pulling his attention back. Ethan knew what loneliness looked like. He had lived with it for years. 5 years ago, he had buried his wife after a long illness. Since then, every decision, every sacrifice, every extra hour worked had been for one purpose: making sure his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, never felt alone. He understood silence. He understood carrying more than a child should carry. As he passed the food court, he noticed the boy again. The child wasn't staring at people. He wasn't looking for help. He wasn't begging. He was looking at a sandwich display behind a glass counter. Turkey, cheese, fresh bread, simple food, the kind most people bought without a second thought. The boy watched it with the quiet focus of someone trying to convince himself he didn't need it. Ethan slowed his pace, then stopped completely. He walked toward the corner seat. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "You waiting for someone?" The boy looked up. His blue eyes seemed older than they should have been. "Maybe." Ethan offered a small smile. "Maybe." The boy shrugged. "I'm not sure anymore." Ethan sat in the empty chair nearby. "Have you eaten today?" The boy hesitated. His gaze drifted back toward the sandwich shop. Then came the sentence Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. "Sir, can I just smell the food?" Ethan blinked. For a second he couldn't speak. Around them, travelers hurried past. A woman laughed into her phone. A businessman rushed toward a boarding gate. Nobody seemed to hear what the child had said. Nobody seemed to notice him at all. The boy lowered his eyes immediately, embarrassed by his own honesty. "Sorry," he whispered. "That was weird." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity. Something deeper. Respect. The kind of respect reserved for people carrying burdens they shouldn't have to carry. "No," Ethan said softly. "That wasn't weird." He glanced toward the food court. Then back at the boy. "What's your name?" "Noah." "Well, Noah," Ethan replied, standing slowly. "I think smelling food is overrated." The boy looked confused. Ethan smiled. "Let's try eating it instead." For the first time, the child's expression changed. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was surprise. Pure surprise. As if kindness had become so rare in his world that he no longer expected it to exist. And while snow clouds gathered beyond the station windows and evening shadows stretched across the terminal floor, neither Ethan nor Noah noticed the dark SUVs entering the city limits miles away. Neither of them knew that dozens of worried people were searching for one quiet little boy. And neither of them could possibly imagine that before this day ended, the simple act of buying lunch would leave an entire transit station standing in stunned silence. Ethan returned from the food counter carrying a tray with 2 sandwiches, a bowl of chicken noodle soup, a bottle of orange juice, and a paper cup of coffee for himself. The smell of warm bread drifted through the air between them. Noah stared at the food for a moment, almost as if he did not believe it was real. Then he looked up. "That is too much." Ethan set the tray down and smiled. "Trust me, If my daughter were here, she would say it is not enough. Noah blinked. You have a daughter? 10 years old. Ethan replied as he slid the sandwich toward him. Her name is Lily. She thinks she is smarter than me. Noah hesitated. Is she? Ethan laughed softly. Most days. For the first time, a tiny smile appeared on Noah's face. It lasted only a second, but it was there. Outside the terminal windows, gray clouds rolled over the mountains. The afternoon light faded early, painting long shadows across the polished floor. Travelers continued rushing from gate to gate, too busy to notice the quiet conversation happening in the corner. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. So where are your parents? Noah lowered his eyes. I am supposed to stay with people. Supposed to? Noah nodded slightly. Things got complicated. Ethan studied him carefully. The answer was strange, but the boy did not sound dishonest. If anything, he sounded exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent too much time carrying thoughts that belonged to adults. The soup steamed gently between them. Noah finally picked up the spoon. He ate slowly at first, then faster. Not because he lacked manners. Because he was hungry. Very hungry. Ethan pretended not to notice. Dignity mattered. Sometimes respect meant allowing people to keep their pride. As Noah ate, Ethan's phone buzzed. A photograph appeared on the screen. Lily stood in front of her school science project, grinning from ear to ear while holding a cardboard model of the solar system. Ethan smiled immediately. Noah glanced at the screen. That is your daughter? That is my whole world, Ethan answered. Noah looked at the picture longer than expected. She looks happy. Ethan's smile softened. I worked pretty hard for that. The words lingered between them. Noah nodded slowly. My mom used to say that happiness is expensive. Ethan frowned slightly. I do not think she meant money. Noah stared into the bowl. Maybe not. For several moments, neither spoke. The station announcements echoed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. A janitor pushed a cleaning cart across the floor. Life continued in ordinary ways. Yet something about Noah still felt unusual. Ethan could not explain it. The boy was polite, calm, thoughtful, but there was a certain way he watched people, as though he had spent years studying rooms before entering them, as though he expected attention but did not want it. Can I ask you something? Noah said quietly. Sure. Why did you stop? Ethan tilted his head. What do you mean? Most people looked at me today. Noah's voice remained calm. You are the only one who actually saw me. Ethan leaned back slightly. The question caught him off guard. Because somebody should. Noah looked down at his sandwich. That is not really an answer. Ethan chuckled softly. Maybe not. He glanced through the terminal windows where the first snowflakes had begun drifting from the darkening sky. When my wife passed away, I spent a long time feeling invisible. People were kind. They brought casseroles. They said all the right things. But after a while, everyone went back to their lives. Noah listened carefully. And you did not. Ethan shook his head. I could not. I had Lily. She needed me every day. The boy was silent for several seconds. Then he asked, was it hard? Ethan laughed quietly. Every day. Then why keep doing it? Ethan looked at the photograph of his daughter again. The answer came easily. Because some people are worth every hard day. Noah's eyes lingered on the picture. Something changed in his expression. Not sadness. Not envy. Something closer to longing. That sounds nice, he whispered. Ethan felt a small ache in his chest. Whatever circumstances had brought Noah here, they were clearly bigger than a missed meal. Bigger than a delayed ride home. The boy seemed surrounded by loneliness despite being too young to understand why. The snow outside thickened. White flakes swirled beneath the station lights. Ethan checked the time. He should have been heading home already. Lily would be waiting. Yet every instinct told him not to leave this child alone. Tell you what, Ethan said. Until we figure out where you need to be, you are not sitting here by yourself. Noah looked up. Genuine surprise crossed his face again. Why? Ethan smiled. Because nobody should have to eat soup alone on a snowy Tuesday. Noah stared at him for a moment. Then, very quietly, he said something that Ethan would remember long after this day was over. Nobody usually notices. The words were simple, barely above a whisper, yet they carried the weight of a much larger story. And somewhere beyond the falling snow, beyond the city lights, beyond the ordinary rhythm of the evening, a chain of events was already moving toward them. Neither Ethan nor Noah knew it yet, but before nightfall, the people searching for this quiet little boy would finally be getting close. The snow continued falling outside, soft white flakes drifting beneath the terminal lights like tiny pieces of silence. Ethan glanced at the clock mounted above gate 14 and felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He should have been home already. Lily would be waiting. She never complained, but she always noticed when he was late. That was the thing about children. They measured love in time. He reached for his phone and opened a text message from her. A photograph appeared almost instantly. Lily sat at the kitchen table surrounded by school books, holding up a hand-drawn picture of the solar system. Beneath it, she had written 3 simple words. "Love you, Dad." Ethan smiled despite himself. Noah noticed. "She sends you pictures?" Ethan nodded. "Almost every day. Even when you are working?" "Especially when I am working." Noah stared at the screen. "That is nice." Ethan put the phone away. "It is." For a moment, neither spoke. The station seemed quieter now. Evening commuters had started, thinning out. The loud energy of the afternoon was giving way to the slower rhythm of night. Cleaning crews moved through the terminal. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of wet coats and melting snow. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the city. Ethan rubbed his hands together and looked toward the windows. "You know," he said, "today was supposed to be a simple day." Noah tilted his head. "What happened?" Ethan laughed softly. "Life happened." Noah actually smiled at that. It was a small smile, but it looked genuine. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Lily needs a medical treatment next month. Nothing dangerous, just expensive." Noah's expression changed immediately. "Is she sick?" "Not exactly." Ethan chose his words carefully. "She has a condition that affects her hearing. The treatment helps. The doctors are optimistic." Noah nodded slowly. "But it costs a lot." Ethan smiled. "You are smart. People tell me that. Then they are probably right." Noah lowered his eyes. "Sometimes being smart does not help." The answer surprised Ethan. It sounded less like something a child would say and more like something learned through experience. "Maybe not," Ethan admitted. "But kindness helps." Noah looked at him. "Does it?" Ethan thought for a moment. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across the polished floor. Outside, snow covered the sidewalks in white. "Most of the time," he finally said. "Not because kindness fixes everything. It does not. But because it reminds people they are not alone." Noah sat very still. What if someone is alone? Nobody stays alone forever. The boy seemed unconvinced. Ethan recognized the look. It was the expression of someone who wanted to believe something but had not yet seen enough evidence. His phone vibrated again. This time it was not a text. It was an email notification. Ethan opened it automatically. The smile disappeared from his face. Noah noticed immediately. "Bad news." Ethan hesitated. "Just bills." He stared at the screen. The balance due for Lily's next treatment was higher than expected. Much higher. For a few seconds the numbers seemed impossibly large. He thought about extra shifts, weekend routes, selling his old fishing boat, maybe postponing repairs on the furnace again. The calculations ran automatically through his mind. Parents became experts at impossible math. Noah watched quietly. "You look worried." Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "I am a dad. It comes with the job. My mom used to say that too." Ethan looked up. "Used to?" Noah immediately looked away. The answer had slipped out before he meant it to. A shadow crossed his face. "She travels a lot," he said softly. "That is all." Ethan sensed there was more to the story, but he did not push. Respect mattered. Trust took time. "Well," Ethan said, standing up, "how about we get some hot chocolate?" Noah blinked. "Really? I think hot chocolate solves at least 15% of life's problems." "Only 15. Ethan grinned. 20 on snowy days. For the first time, Noah laughed. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it was real. Several nearby travelers turned briefly toward the sound. The boy seemed surprised by his own laughter, as though it had been a long time since he had heard it. Ethan felt something warm settle in his chest. Quiet strength. That was what his wife used to call moments like this. Not grand victories. Not dramatic miracles. Just one small human connection pushing back against loneliness. Neither of them noticed the television mounted near the terminal entrance. A news anchor appeared on the screen. Beneath her image, a scrolling headline moved across the bottom. Most travelers ignored it. Ethan never looked up. Noah never saw it. And somewhere beyond the city lights, through the snow-covered streets of Denver, several black SUVs were moving steadily toward the transit station. carrying people who had been searching for one missing boy since sunrise. The hot chocolate arrived in oversized paper cups with little cardboard sleeves wrapped around them. Steam curled upward into the cool terminal air. Noah wrapped both hands around his cup immediately, almost as if he was warming something deeper than cold fingers. Ethan watched him for a moment and smiled. There was something comforting about seeing a child enjoy a simple kindness. The world spent so much time chasing bigger things that people often forgot how powerful small things could be. Outside, the snowfall grew heavier. White flakes drifted beneath the streetlights and settled across the sidewalks in soft blankets. Through the large glass windows, Denver looked quieter than usual. Cars moved more slowly. Headlights glowed against the growing darkness. The city seemed to be holding its breath. Ethan checked the time again. Nearly 2 hours had passed since he first noticed Noah sitting alone. That realization surprised him. The conversation had felt effortless, natural, the way conversations sometimes become when nobody is trying to impress anyone. You know, Ethan said, taking a sip of coffee, Lily would probably like you. Noah looked up. Why? Because she likes people who listen. Noah frowned slightly. Most kids like people who talk. Not Lily. Ethan laughed softly. She says the loudest person in the room is usually the one learning the least. Noah smiled. She sounds smart. Dangerously smart. Noah stared into his hot chocolate. I would like to meet her someday. The sentence came out quietly, almost before he realized he had spoken it. Ethan noticed the way Noah immediately looked away afterward, as though he had revealed more than intended. I think she would like that, Ethan replied. A brief silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. The kind that did not need filling. Nearby, an elderly couple shared a newspaper. A college student typed furiously on a laptop. A mother helped her young son zip his winter coat. Ordinary moments unfolded everywhere. Yet Noah continued drawing Ethan's attention. Not because he was dramatic. Quite the opposite. Because everything about him seemed carefully controlled. Deliberate. Even the way he sat. Even the way he chose his words. Most children his age bounced between thoughts. Noah measured every sentence. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Noah nodded. How long have you been here today? The boy hesitated. A while. Hours. Maybe. Since this morning? Noah looked toward the terminal windows. Snowflakes drifted against the glass. I stopped checking. Ethan felt concern settle into his chest. Were you trying to go somewhere? Noah considered the question carefully. I was trying to get away from somewhere. Ethan did not answer immediately. The honesty in those words felt significant. Not dramatic. Just true. Did someone hurt you? Noah shook his head at once. No. The answer came so quickly and firmly that Ethan believed him. Then why leave? Noah lowered his eyes. Because sometimes people stop seeing who you are. Ethan frowned slightly. What do you mean? The boy stared into the dark surface of his hot chocolate. Sometimes they only see what you represent. Ethan was quiet. The answer sounded far older than 11 years old. For a moment, he wondered if Noah came from an unusually wealthy family. Or perhaps a famous one. Something about the way he spoke suggested a life very different from most children. Then Noah glanced at Ethan. Do people ever treat you differently because of your job? Ethan laughed. Not usually. Really, most people barely notice bus drivers. Noah nodded slowly. Exactly. Ethan blinked. Exactly what? People see through you. The boy's voice remained calm. That means they see the real version. Ethan sat back slightly. The observation surprised him. Not because it was wrong. Because it was insightful. Very insightful. You think that is a good thing? Noah nodded. Most people spend their whole lives wanting attention. He looked around the terminal. But attention changes people. Ethan followed his gaze. Travelers hurried through the station. Some looked stressed. Some distracted. Some exhausted. Very few looked happy. Maybe you have a point, Ethan admitted. Noah offered a faint smile. Then his eyes drifted toward the terminal entrance. For the first time all evening, Ethan saw genuine nervousness cross the boy's face. It lasted less than a second. Then it disappeared. But Ethan noticed. What is it? Noah quickly shook his head. Nothing. You sure? Yes. Yet something had clearly changed. The boy's shoulders tightened slightly. His gaze kept returning toward the entrance doors. Ethan followed his line of sight, but saw nothing unusual. Just people coming and going through. The snow. Noah, Ethan asked gently. Do you think people are looking for you? The boy was silent. Several seconds passed. Then he finally nodded once. Probably. Family. Another pause. Something like that. Ethan looked carefully at him. Would they be worried? Noah's eyes softened. Very. The answer carried unmistakable sadness. Not fear. Not guilt. Sadness. Before Ethan could ask another question, a sudden movement near the entrance drew attention across the terminal. Several people stopped walking. Others looked through the windows toward the parking lot. Headlights reflected across the falling snow. Dark vehicles had just entered the station grounds. Noah saw them too. And for the first time since Ethan had met him, all color seemed to drain from the boy's face. For a few seconds, nobody seemed to understand what they were seeing. The vehicles rolled slowly through the falling snow, their dark paint reflecting the glow of the station lights. One after another, they pulled into the loading area outside the terminal entrance. Conversations faded. Travelers slowed their pace. Even the electronic announcements overhead seemed less important. Ethan glanced toward the windows, then back at Noah. The boy had gone completely still. His hands tightened around the paper cup. Noah, Ethan asked quietly, are those people looking for you? The boy swallowed hard. Maybe. Ethan repeated. Noah lowered his eyes. I did not think they would find me this fast. Ethan felt concern rise in his chest. Not fear. Concern. Everything about Noah still told him this was a good kid. A lost kid perhaps. A confused kid certainly. But not a kid who belonged in trouble. Outside, doors opened. Several men and women stepped from the vehicles wearing dark winter coats. Their movements were calm and organized. Professional. They spoke briefly into earpieces while scanning the terminal through the glass. Travelers near the entrance began whispering to one another. Who are they? Someone asked. Federal agents? Another person guessed. Ethan noticed Noah staring at the floor. Hey. The boy looked up. Whatever is happening, you do not have to face it alone. Noah's expression softened. Why do you keep saying things like that? Ethan smiled faintly. Because somebody said them to me once. Snow tapped gently against the windows. The warmth of the terminal suddenly felt smaller. Quieter. More fragile. One of the agents entered through the main doors. Then another. Then several more. They moved through the station without urgency, yet with unmistakable purpose. The crowd naturally parted around them. People stepped aside. Conversations stopped. Phones appeared in a few curious hands. Noah stared toward the entrance. Ethan noticed something unexpected. The boy did not look scared. He looked disappointed. Deeply disappointed. As though something precious was about to end. You wanted more time? Ethan said softly. Noah looked surprised. How did you know? Ethan shrugged. You have that look. What look? The same one Lily gets when summer vacation is ending. For the first time since the vehicles arrived, a small smile appeared on Noah's face. It vanished almost immediately. Today felt normal, he admitted. Normal is underrated, Ethan replied. Noah nodded slowly. You have no idea. The agents continued moving through the terminal. One spoke briefly with a station employee. Another checked something on a tablet. Their attention seemed focused on specific areas rather than random searching. Ethan looked at Noah carefully. Who are you, kid? Noah let out a long breath. Just Noah. I think there is a little more to it than that. The boy considered his answer. Sometimes people know my name before they meet me. Ethan frowned. That sounds exhausting. It is. Another silence settled between them. Around the terminal, curiosity continued building. Travelers glanced between the agents and the snowy parking lot. A television above the waiting area switched to a breaking news update. Nobody paid much attention at first. Then several people began staring. Ethan still did not notice. His attention remained on Noah. Can I ask you something? The boy said. Of course. If you knew who I was this afternoon, would you still have bought me lunch? Ethan laughed softly. That depends. Noah raised an eyebrow. On what? Whether you were hungry. The answer hit the boy harder than Ethan expected. Noah blinked rapidly and looked away toward the windows. For several seconds he did not speak. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. Most people do not answer like that. Ethan looked at him with quiet kindness. Maybe most people asked the wrong question. Near the entrance, one of the agents suddenly stopped walking. His gaze moved across the terminal. Then it locked onto the corner where Ethan and Noah were sitting. The man's posture changed immediately. He spoke into a microphone clipped beneath his coat. 2 other agents turned. Then 3 more. Across the station, conversations died away one by one. A strange stillness spread through the building. Noah saw it happen. Ethan saw it happen. The agents were no longer searching. They had found exactly who they came for. And as several pairs of eyes focused on the quiet boy beside him, Ethan finally realized that Noah was not just another child who had wandered into a bus station on a snowy afternoon. The station seemed to shrink around them. Conversations faded into whispers. Footsteps slowed. Even the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt louder than before. Ethan followed the agents with his eyes as they moved steadily across the terminal. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. Yet there was an unmistakable sense of purpose in every step. Noah sat quietly beside him, staring at the table between them. The half-empty cup of hot chocolate remained untouched. "You knew this was coming," Ethan said gently. Noah nodded once. "Eventually. You were not trying to disappear forever." No, the boy's voice was calm but heavy. "Just for one day." Ethan looked at him carefully. "One day from what?" Noah released a slow breath. "Everything." Before Ethan could ask another question, a woman in a dark coat appeared several yards away. Unlike the others, she was not studying the room. She was staring directly at Noah. The moment her eyes found him, her expression changed completely. Relief washed across her face so suddenly and so honestly that Ethan felt it from across the terminal. The woman stopped walking. One hand rose to cover her mouth. For a second, she simply stood there. Then she continued forward, moving faster than before. Noah looked up. His eyes softened immediately. "Grace," he whispered. Ethan turned toward him. "Your mother?" Noah nodded. The woman reached them moments later. She dropped to one knee beside Noah and wrapped both arms around him. For several seconds, neither spoke. The terminal remained completely silent around them. Travelers who had been hurrying minutes earlier now stood frozen in place. Watching a reunion they did not fully understand. Ethan looked away respectfully. Some moments belonged to families. Some moments deserved privacy, even in public. Finally, he heard the woman speak. "I have been so worried." Her voice trembled slightly. "Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you?" Noah lowered his head. "I know." "Then why?" The question hung in the air. Noah glanced toward Ethan before answering. "Because I wanted one day where nobody knew who I was." Grace closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she seemed exhausted. Not angry, not frustrated, just tired in the way only people carrying enormous responsibility become tired. She brushed a hand through Noah's hair. "You could have told me. You would have said no." To Ethan's surprise, Grace laughed softly. "That is probably true." A few of the agents exchanged relieved smiles. The tension that had followed them into the station began fading away. Whatever crisis had existed before, it was clearly ending now. One of the agents approached and spoke quietly with Grace. She nodded, thanked him, then turned toward Ethan for the first time. Her eyes immediately settled on the empty sandwich wrappers, the soup bowl, and the hot chocolate cups. She understood the story before anyone explained it. "You are Ethan?" she asked. Ethan stood awkwardly. "Yes, ma'am." Grace extended her hand. "Thank you." Ethan shook it. It was nothing. Several nearby agents exchanged knowing looks. Grace did not. She held Ethan's gaze. "No," she said quietly. "It was not." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. She glanced toward Noah again. "Do you know what he told me when they found him?" Ethan shook his head. He said somebody finally talked to him like a normal kid. The station seemed even quieter after that. Noah looked embarrassed. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, he seemed like a normal kid to me." Grace smiled sadly. "That is because you saw him. Most people see everything except that." Outside the windows, snow continued falling across the parking lot. The dark vehicles waited beneath the streetlights. Their reflections shimmered on the wet pavement. Inside, warmth filled the terminal once more. Not excitement, not curiosity, something gentler. Respect. Grace reached into her coat pocket and removed a small photograph. She handed it to Ethan. It showed Noah standing beside several important public figures at a formal event. Cameras flashed in every direction. Reporters crowded the background. Noah looked uncomfortable in every picture. Ethan stared for several seconds before finally understanding. The boy had not run away from danger. He had run away from attention. And suddenly the question Noah had asked earlier echoed in Ethan's mind. "If you knew who I was this afternoon, would you still have bought me lunch?" Looking at the photograph, Ethan smiled softly. The answer had not changed at all. For several moments, nobody moved. The terminal remained wrapped in a strange and respectful silence. Snow drifted beyond the glass walls. The agents stepped back slightly now that their search was over. Travelers slowly returned to their conversations, but many continued glancing toward Ethan and Noah. Something about the scene had touched them, not because of who Noah was, because of how he had been treated. Grace carefully folded the photograph and slipped it back into her coat pocket. Most adults spend 5 minutes with him talking about influence, responsibility, or expectations, she said quietly. You spent 5 hours talking about sandwiches, school projects, and bus routes. Noah smiled faintly. The bus route story was actually pretty good. Ethan laughed. Thank you. Finally, somebody appreciates my material. The boy shook his head, and for a brief moment, he looked exactly like any other 11-year-old. No cameras. No pressure. No expectations. Just a kid trying not to laugh. Grace noticed it too. Her eyes softened. I have not seen that smile in a while. Noah looked down immediately. The compliment embarrassed him. Ethan understood. Some children became uncomfortable when people paid too much attention to them. Well, Ethan said, standing slowly, I should probably get home before my daughter starts sending a search party. Noah looked up at once. You are leaving? Eventually. Ethan smiled. I think she would prefer I make it home before midnight. Noah nodded, but disappointment briefly crossed his face. Grace noticed. So did Ethan. The realization surprised him. In just a few hours, this quiet boy had somehow become important to him. Not because of who he was, because of who he seemed to be underneath everything else. One of the agents approached Grace and quietly handed her a phone. She glanced at the screen and sighed. They already know. Ethan frowned. Know what? Grace gave a tired smile. The media? Noah closed his eyes. Of course they do. I am afraid so. The boy looked toward the terminal windows where snowflakes continued falling through the glow of the parking lot lights. It was nice while it lasted. Ethan heard genuine sadness in his voice. Not dramatic sadness. The quieter kind. The kind people feel when something meaningful ends too soon. You know, Ethan said, most good days end. Noah looked at him. That is supposed to make me feel better? Ethan chuckled. Not really, but it makes them worth remembering. The boy considered that for a moment. Then he nodded. I guess. Grace studied Ethan carefully. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you first saw him sitting here alone, what made you stop? Ethan glanced at Noah, then toward the empty soup bowl and sandwich wrappers still sitting on the table. The answer seemed obvious. He looked hungry. Grace smiled. That's simple. Ethan shrugged. Most important things are. The words settled over the group like warm light. One of the agents looked away and smiled to himself. Another quietly cleared his throat. Sometimes truth carried more weight than speeches. Noah suddenly reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was slightly wrinkled from being carried all day. Here. Ethan accepted it. What is this? Open it later. Ethan looked confused. Why later? Noah smiled. Because if you open it now, I will be embarrassed. Grace laughed softly. That alone makes me curious. Ethan carefully folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Fair enough. Outside, another wave of snow swept across the parking lot. The world beyond the windows had become white and quiet. The city lights blurred behind falling flakes. It looked almost peaceful. Noah stood up slowly. The agents nearby immediately became more attentive, though they remained respectful and distant. Ethan noticed the reaction. Noah noticed him noticing. See, the boy said quietly. It never stops. Ethan looked at the agents, then back at Noah. Maybe not. Do you think that is normal? Ethan considered the question carefully. Then he smiled. No, Noah sighed dramatically. Thank you. But wanting one day to feel ordinary. Ethan continued. That sounds completely normal to me. For a second, neither spoke. Then Noah did something unexpected. He stepped forward and hugged him. It was quick, awkward, completely sincere. Ethan froze for half a second before returning the gesture. Around them, the station seemed to grow quiet once again. Not because people recognized Noah, because they recognized kindness. And as the snow continued falling outside and the long day slowly approached its end, Ethan had the strange feeling that this story was far from over. The hug lasted only a second, yet it lingered in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Noah stepped back first, suddenly looking embarrassed by his own emotion. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and stared at the floor. Ethan smiled. You know, Lily would tell you that was a perfectly acceptable human interaction. Noah laughed softly. Does she have rules for everything? Pretty much. That sounds exhausting. It is. Grace shook her head, smiling for the first time that evening without any trace of worry behind it. Around them, the atmosphere inside the terminal slowly returned to normal. Travelers resumed their journeys. Rolling suitcases rattled across the floor. Announcements echoed overhead. Yet something had changed. The curiosity was gone. What remained was respect. People no longer looked at Noah because they were wondering who he was. They looked because they had witnessed something genuine. One of the agents approached Grace and quietly informed her that transportation was ready whenever they wished to leave. She nodded but made no move toward the exit. Instead, she turned back toward Ethan. There is something I would like you to understand, she said. Ethan shifted awkwardly. You really do not owe me any explanations. Perhaps not, Grace replied. But you deserve one. Noah sighed dramatically. This is the part where adults explain things. Yes, Grace answered. And you will survive it. The boy rolled his eyes. Ethan laughed. The normality of the exchange felt strangely comforting. Grace folded her hands. The attention surrounding Noah did not happen overnight. It grew over several years. Every school event became a story. Every photograph became news. Every mistake became public. Noah stared out the window toward the falling snow. Even when it was not a mistake. Grace nodded sadly. Even then, Ethan listened quietly. He thought about being 11 years old. School projects, baseball cards, riding bicycles with friends. The simple freedom of growing up without strangers forming opinions about you. That sounds difficult, he said. Noah smiled faintly. That is a very polite way of saying it. Another agent approached carrying a tablet. Grace reviewed something briefly before handing it back. The screen had displayed dozens of missed messages. Ethan caught only a glimpse, but it was enough to understand. Entire organizations had been searching for this child. Resources, personnel, hours of effort. All because one boy had wanted a single ordinary day. Were they angry? Ethan asked gently. Noah looked confused. Who? The people searching for you. Noah thought about it. No, he glanced toward Grace. Mostly worried. Grace reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Very worried. The boy lowered his eyes. I know. For a moment silence settled over the group again. Beyond the glass, snow continued blanketing the city. The parking lot looked almost magical beneath the lights. White flakes drifted through the darkness like tiny stars. Ethan checked the time and sighed. I really should get going. Noah's expression fell slightly. Right. Ethan noticed immediately. Hey. Noah looked up. This is not goodbye forever. Maybe. Ethan smiled. That is a pretty pessimistic answer for an 11-year-old. I am working on it. Grace laughed softly. Trust me. That is progress. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and felt the folded piece of paper Noah had given him earlier. He still had not opened it. You are sure I should wait? Noah nodded firmly. Absolutely. Now I am even more curious. Good. The boy seemed pleased by that. One of the agents near the entrance suddenly touched an earpiece and listened carefully. His posture straightened. Several others exchanged brief looks. Ethan noticed. Everything okay? Grace glanced toward them and nodded. More reporters have arrived outside. Noah groaned. Of course they have. Ethan looked at him. You really do not like attention, do you? Noah answered immediately. Attention is people deciding who you are before they meet you. The words hung in the air. Ethan thought about them carefully. Then he smiled. That might be the smartest thing I have heard all week. Noah shrugged. People tell me that too. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Warm light reflected across the polished floor. The station felt peaceful again. And for the first time since the agents arrived, Noah seemed calm. Not because his situation had changed. Because somebody had reminded him that he could still be seen as a person before anything else. As Ethan prepared to leave, he had no idea that the folded paper sitting quietly in his pocket would soon reveal something that would bring tears to his eyes and change the course of both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Nearly an hour later, Ethan finally stepped out of the terminal and into the cold Colorado night. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The air smelled clean and sharp, carrying the quiet stillness that only arrives after a heavy snowfall. Behind him, the station doors opened and closed as travelers continued their journeys, but the evening already felt unreal. He glanced back once. Through the glass, He could still see Noah standing beside Grace. The boy lifted a hand. Ethan returned the gesture and then turned toward the parking lot. The black SUVs remained parked beneath the lights like silent sentinels. Several agents stood nearby, speaking quietly into radios. Yet none of that occupied Ethan's thoughts. Instead, he kept thinking about a lonely kid sitting beside a sandwich shop asking if he could smell the food. Some moments refuse to leave a person's heart. This was one of them. His truck started on the second try. The heater rattled to life as he pulled onto the snow-covered streets. Christmas lights glowed from nearby houses. Storefront windows reflected across the wet pavement. Denver looked peaceful beneath its blanket of white. For the first time all day, Ethan was alone with his thoughts. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the folded paper Noah had given him. The temptation to open it immediately was almost overwhelming. Yet he remembered the boy's words. "Open it later." Ethan smiled to himself. "All right, kid," he murmured. "Later it is." 20 minutes later, he pulled into the driveway of a modest two-bedroom home on the edge of the city. Warm yellow light glowed from the kitchen window. The sight immediately eased something inside him. Home. No matter how difficult life became, home remained sacred. Before he could even reach the front porch, the front door burst open. "Dad." Lily ran outside wearing mismatched socks and an oversized sweater. Ethan laughed and caught her in a hug. "Careful. It is freezing out here." "You are late." "I know. Very late." "I know that too." Lily narrowed her eyes dramatically. "I was preparing a speech." "That sounds dangerous." It was. Ethan smiled as they walked inside together. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and tomato soup. Schoolbooks covered one end of the kitchen table. A half-finished science project occupied the other. Everything about it felt imperfect and wonderful. Lily immediately noticed his expression. Something happened. Ethan removed his coat. "Why do you say that?" "Because you have the face." "What face?" "The face you get when something important happens." Ethan laughed softly. "You really are too smart." "I know." They settled at the kitchen table while snow continued drifting past the windows. Ethan told her everything. Not the details that belonged to Noah. Not the private parts. Just the story of meeting a lonely boy, buying him dinner, and spending an afternoon talking. Lily listened carefully without interrupting. When he finished, she sat quietly for several seconds. "He sounds sad." "A little. But also nice." Ethan nodded. "Very nice." Lily stared toward the window. "I think lonely people recognize each other." The statement surprised him. "Where did that come from?" She shrugged. "School library book." Ethan laughed. "Of course." Then he remembered the folded paper. "Oh." He reached into his pocket. "He gave me something before I left." Lily immediately leaned forward. "Open it." "That was exactly my plan." Ethan carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, clearly written by a child who chose his words carefully. The note contained only a few sentences. "Thank you for talking to me instead of about me. Thank you for buying lunch without asking who I was first. And thank you for reminding me that being normal is not something to be ashamed of." Beneath the message was one final line. "Someday I would like to meet Lily." Ethan stopped reading. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. Across the table, Lily blinked several times. "That is the nicest note I have ever seen." Ethan nodded slowly. For reasons he could not fully explain, emotion tightened in his chest. Not because of who Noah was. Because of what he had needed. Respect. Kindness. A normal conversation. Things so simple most people forgot their value. Lily gently touched the paper. "Dad." "Yeah. I think he needed you today." Ethan looked at the note again. Then out the window where snow continued falling beneath the streetlights. Somewhere across the city, Noah was probably heading home to a world very different from his own. Yet somehow their paths had crossed for a few precious hours. "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. Then he smiled. "Although I have a feeling he helped me too." The next morning arrived wrapped in fresh snow and pale winter sunlight. Ethan woke before dawn as usual. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the furnace and the occasional creak of settling wood. He brewed coffee, packed Lily's lunch, and glanced once more at the note Noah had written. It still sat on the kitchen counter where he had left it the night before. Somehow the simple message felt more valuable than anything money could buy. By 7 o'clock, Ethan was back behind the wheel of his city bus. The familiar rhythm of the route settled around him. Passengers climbed aboard carrying briefcases, backpacks, grocery bags, and sleepy expressions. Most offered quick greetings. Some stared at their phones. Others gazed silently through the frosted windows. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Ethan liked that. Ordinary life had a quiet dignity all its own. At mid-morning, while waiting at a downtown stop, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. He almost ignored it. Almost. Hello. There was a brief pause. Then a familiar voice answered. Good morning, Ethan. He smiled immediately. Grace. I hope I am not interrupting. Not at all. Outside, passengers stepped on and off the bus while snowflakes drifted through the cold air. I wanted to thank you again, Grace said. You already did. Not properly. Ethan laughed softly. I am starting to think you and Noah have that in common. To his surprise, Grace laughed too. That is probably true. For a moment neither spoke. Then her voice became more serious. There is something you should know. Ethan listened carefully. Yesterday was bigger than it appeared. How so? Grace hesitated. Noah has spent years surrounded by people whose jobs involve protecting him, advising him, educating him, or preparing him for responsibilities most children never face. Snow tapped lightly against the windshield. Ethan watched a young mother help her son cross the street. That sounds like a heavy burden. It is. Grace released a slow breath. When we finally found him yesterday, several people expected him to be upset, frightened, or angry. Was he? No, her voice softened. He kept talking about a bus driver who bought him soup. Ethan smiled despite himself. It was pretty good soup. You joke, but I am serious. Grace paused. For the first time in months, he slept through the night. Ethan blinked. The statement caught him off guard. Really? Really? Outside, traffic moved slowly through slushy streets. The city seemed quieter than usual. Children need many things, Grace continued. Safety, education, opportunity. But sometimes what they need most is to be treated like children. Ethan thought about Noah sitting beside the sandwich shop. The careful way he chose his words. The loneliness hidden behind his maturity. I think he forgot he was allowed to be one. Ethan said quietly. Exactly. Another brief silence followed. Then Grace surprised him again. Would you and Lily be willing to have lunch with us this weekend? Ethan nearly dropped his phone. Lunch. Very informal. No cameras. No publicity. Just lunch. He laughed softly. You make that sound like a classified operation. Trust me, Grace replied, amused. For Noah, it practically is. Ethan looked through the windshield as sunlight reflected across the snowy sidewalks. He imagined Lily's reaction. I think she would like that. Good. Grace sounded relieved. Because Noah has already asked 3 times. Ethan smiled. That sounds more like an 11-year-old. It does. When the call ended, Ethan sat quietly for a moment before pulling away from the curb. Something warm settled inside him. Not excitement. Gratitude. The kind that arrives unexpectedly. Hours later, during his lunch break, he stopped at a small diner near the transit yard. The television mounted above the counter happened to be playing a news program. Ethan barely paid attention until a familiar photograph appeared on the screen. Noah stood beside several prominent national figures at a public event. Reporters discussed future expectations, leadership programs, and public responsibilities. The language sounded polished and important. Yet Ethan found himself smiling, because none of those experts knew the version of Noah who worried about being normal. None of them knew the boy who asked if he could smell the food because he was too polite to ask for a meal. None of them knew the child who wanted one ordinary day. And as Ethan stirred cream into his coffee, he realized something remarkable. Yesterday, for a few precious hours, Noah had escaped an entire world of expectations. Not because of wealth, not because of influence, not because of protection, because one stranger had chosen kindness before curiosity. And sometimes, that made all the difference. Saturday arrived bright and cold. Fresh snow covered the neighborhoods of Denver, turning rooftops and fences into smooth white shapes beneath a clear blue sky. Lily had been awake since 6 in the morning. By 8, she had already changed outfits twice and asked her father the same question at least 12 times. What if he does not like me? Ethan laughed as he adjusted the collar of his jacket. Lily, you have never met a person who did not like you. That is not true. Name one. She opened her mouth, paused, then frowned. That is not the point. Ethan smiled. Some worries belonged only to children, and somehow that made them important. An hour later, They arrived at a quiet restaurant tucked into the foothills west of the city. There were no cameras outside, no reporters, no crowds, just a small building surrounded by pine trees dusted with snow. Exactly as Grace had promised. Inside, warm light reflected across wooden tables. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Near the back window sat Grace and Noah. The moment Noah saw them enter, he stood up so quickly that he nearly knocked over his chair. "You came." Ethan laughed. "You sound surprised." "I was making contingency plans." Lily blinked. "You make contingency plans?" Noah nodded seriously. "For everything." Lily stared at him for a second. Then she smiled. "You are weird." To Ethan's surprise, Noah grinned. "That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." Within minutes, the two children were talking as though they had known each other for years. They compared favorite books, argued about which planets were most interesting, debated whether hot chocolate was better with marshmallows or whipped cream. Ethan watched quietly from across the table. The change in Noah was remarkable. Gone was the guarded caution he had carried inside the transit station. Gone was the careful distance. Here, with no cameras and no expectations, he looked younger, lighter, more himself. Grace noticed it too. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "For lunch." "For all of this." She gestured toward the children. "You have no idea what this means." Ethan followed her gaze. Lily was explaining a science experiment using 3 breadsticks and a packet of sugar. Noah listened with complete seriousness. "Looks like a dangerous amount of intelligence at one table," Ethan joked. Grace smiled. Then her expression became thoughtful. "There is something else I wanted to tell you." Ethan waited. After that day at the station, Noah asked me a question. "What question?" Grace looked toward the children again. "He asked why people are so interested in important titles, but not interested in people." Ethan sat quietly. "That is a tough question." "It is." She folded her hands. Then he said something I will never forget. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What was it?" Grace smiled softly. "He said a bus driver understood him better than most powerful people he has ever met." Ethan immediately shook his head. "That is giving me far too much credit." "No," Grace replied gently. "It is not." Across the room, Noah suddenly waved. "Mr. Walker." "Yeah." "Did you know Lily can name every moon of Jupiter?" Ethan groaned dramatically. "Please do not encourage her." Lily pointed triumphantly. "See? He never supports my genius." The table erupted in laughter. Even a few nearby diners smiled. The sound lingered in the warm restaurant air like music. For a moment, nobody was thinking about public responsibilities, media attention, or expectations. There were no important names, no important positions, just 2 children laughing together and 2 adults grateful to witness it. And as sunlight reflected across the snowy mountains outside, Ethan realized that the greatest gift from that strange day at the transit station was not the story itself. It was the simple fact that one lonely boy had found a friend, and one little girl had discovered that kindness sometimes arrives in the most unexpected ways. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm nobody had expected. Snow gradually disappeared from the sidewalks. Winter loosened its grip on the city. School projects replaced holiday decorations. Life moved forward in quiet, ordinary ways. Yet every Saturday afternoon seemed to bring another unexpected meeting between 2 children who had somehow found exactly what they needed in each other. Noah and Lily exchanged books, science facts, and endless debates about subjects that most adults barely understood. Ethan often found himself listening from the next room while pretending not to. The conversations always made him smile. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, Lily sat at the table working on homework while Ethan sorted through a stack of bills. The familiar knot returned to his chest as he reviewed the numbers. Utilities, groceries, mortgage payments, medical expenses. The upcoming treatment for Lily still weighed heavily on his mind. He never complained about it. Parents rarely did. They simply carried what needed carrying. Still, some days felt heavier than others. Lily noticed immediately. "You have the face again." Ethan looked up. "What face?" "The worried face." He smiled weakly. "I thought we retired that joke." "We did not." She pointed at the papers. "Is it money?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "A little." Lily set down her pencil. "The treatment." Ethan nodded again. "The treatment." For a moment the room became quiet. Outside, a gentle breeze moved through the budding trees. Spring was arriving. New beginnings always seem to appear when people needed them most. Dad, Lily said softly. Yeah, you always figure things out. Ethan smiled. That is a lot of confidence. It is not confidence. She shrugged. It is evidence. The answer made him laugh despite himself. Later that evening, his phone rang. Noah's name appeared on the screen. Ethan answered immediately. Hey, buddy. Mr. Walker, I need your professional opinion. Ethan smiled. That sounds serious. It is extremely serious. Okay. If somebody says Pluto is not a real planet, should that friendship continue? Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. By the time it ended, Ethan felt lighter than he had all day. Sometimes children had a remarkable gift. They reminded adults what mattered. A few days later, another invitation arrived from Grace. This time it was not lunch. It was a small gathering at a private educational foundation that supported young students with hearing challenges. Grace explained that Noah wanted Ethan and Lily to attend. Ethan almost declined. Crowds made him uncomfortable. Public events made him even more uncomfortable. But Lily's excitement settled the matter instantly. On the evening of the event, they arrived at a beautiful historic building overlooking the city. Warm lights glowed from tall windows. Guests moved through the halls dressed in elegant clothing. Ethan felt slightly out of place in his best jacket. Lily noticed and squeezed his hand. You look fine. Thank you. You still look nervous. Thank you. She grinned. Inside the main hall, people gathered around exhibits celebrating student achievements. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed beneath high ceilings. Yet despite the elegant surroundings, Ethan found himself focusing on something else. Every student there seemed valued for who they were rather than what they represented. It reminded him of Noah. It reminded him of the lesson that had quietly changed so many lives. Then he spotted Grace across the room. Beside her stood Noah. The boy immediately waved. Not because Ethan was important. Not because Ethan was famous. Simply because he was happy to see him. And in a world that often measured people by titles, accomplishments, or influence, that simple gesture felt more meaningful than anyone in the room could possibly understand. As the evening continued, guests slowly gathered inside the main hall. Conversations softened. Chairs filled. The warm glow of chandeliers reflected across polished wood floors while the city lights shimmered beyond the tall windows. Ethan expected speeches. He expected presentations. What he did not expect was to hear his own name. A woman stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. She spoke about opportunity, education, resilience, and the importance of community. Then she paused and smiled toward the audience. Tonight, she said, we would also like to recognize an act of kindness that reminded all of us what true leadership looks like. Ethan immediately looked around, assuming she meant someone else. Grace smiled quietly. Noah grinned. Lily's eyes widened. Dad, she whispered. I think they mean you. Ethan shook his head. Absolutely not. They did. A photograph appeared on the large screen behind the stage. It was not a picture of a famous person. It was not a picture of an important event. It was a simple security camera image from the transit station. A bus driver sitting beside a lonely boy sharing a meal. The room grew silent. The woman continued speaking. A few months ago, a child having a difficult day met someone who asked no questions about status, influence, or importance. He simply saw a hungry boy and chose kindness. Ethan felt his face turn red. He wished very much to disappear into his chair. Around the room, people listened carefully. No applause interrupted the story. No one checked their phones. The silence itself felt respectful. Then the speaker invited Noah onto the stage. The boy walked forward slowly, looking slightly nervous. He glanced once toward Ethan before facing the audience. Most people think important moments are big, Noah said. They think they happen on stages like this. His voice remained calm, clear, honest. But the most important moment of my year happened at a table near a sandwich shop. The room became even quieter. Noah smiled softly. That day, somebody talked to me instead of talking about me. Somebody cared whether I had eaten lunch before caring who I was. Ethan looked down. Grace gently touched his arm. Across the hall, several people wiped away tears. Noah continued. I learned something that day. Respect feels different from attention. Attention is loud. Respect is quiet. Not a single person spoke. And kindness is not valuable because of who receives it. Kindness is valuable because of who gives it. The final sentence seemed to settle over the room like sunlight. For several seconds after he finished, nobody moved. Then applause rose slowly. Not explosive, not dramatic. Warm, genuine. The kind of applause reserved for truth. Noah returned to his seat beside Grace. Ethan shook his head. You did not tell me about any of this. Noah smiled. You would have worried. Correct. Lily leaned forward proudly. I liked the speech. Thank you. The Jupiter-Moon argument was still better. Noah laughed. Fair point. Later that evening, as guests began leaving, the four of them stepped outside. Spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and distant rain. The city stretched beneath the hillside in a sea of lights. For a few moments, nobody spoke. They simply stood together enjoying the view. Then Noah looked at Ethan. Can I ask one more question? Of course. If we had never met at the station, do you think everything would be different? Ethan thought about it carefully. He thought about the sandwich, the hot chocolate, the note, the friendship between two children, the countless conversations that followed. Then he smiled. Maybe. Noah nodded slowly. I think so too. Lily folded her arms. Good thing you bought lunch then. Everyone laughed. The sound drifted into the evening air. Ethan looked at the two children standing side by side beneath the fading sky and felt something he had not expected when this story began. Gratitude. Not for recognition, not for attention, but for the reminder that ordinary kindness still mattered. Sometimes the world celebrates power. Sometimes it celebrates wealth. Sometimes it celebrates influence. But every once in a while, life pauses long enough to honor something quieter. A meal shared with a stranger. A conversation without judgment. A simple act of grace. And as the city lights sparkled below and the laughter of two children echoed softly beside him, Ethan realized that the greatest reward had never been recognition at all. It was knowing that one ordinary choice, made without expecting anything in return, had helped someone feel seen. And in the end, that was more than enough.